When pictures started popping up online of a huge orangutan in rough shape, veterinarian Charles felt a strong pull to check it out. People familiar with the zoo where it lived said the animal didn't look like that because of overfeeding. There had to be something else behind it, and Charles was determined to find out. When he finally got permission to examine the orangutan in person, what he discovered left him stunned. When Charles stepped into the enclosure with the giant orangutan, the animal barely even noticed him. It looked weak, like it couldn't even gather the energy to move. Swallowing his nerves, Charles gently began his exam. It didn't take long for him to realize that the rumors were right. This wasn't about being overfed at all. Something deeper was wrong with this orangutan, and Charles knew he had to act fast if he wanted to give it a real shot at surviving. But how did this orangutan get so big? What exactly did Charles find during his exam? And could he still save the poor thing? Before we dive into the full story, hit that like button, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss any new videos. Visitors had been raising concerns for quite some time, but it felt like no one at the privatized zoo cared much about the orangutan. Staff brushed off the comments. They claimed it was normal for an orangutan to be that size. The truth was, all the animals were stuck in small enclosures, and they all looked a bit sluggish. But this seemed different. This orangutan, named Toothy, had put on a massive amount of weight recently, and now it barely moved at all. Toothy spent most of his days lying in the same spot for hours. To the average zoogoer, it looked like he'd just been overfed. But those who knew more about the zoo and its owners were convinced that wasn't the case. Things had always been a bit strange at this place. One day, an off-duty police officer visited the zoo with his kids, even though he wasn't a fan of zoos. He went for their sake. But what he saw there hit him hard. The tiny cages, poor conditions, and the unhealthy look of many animals brought him close to tears. And when he saw the orangutan, it pushed him over the edge. He couldn't ignore it. He felt like he had a responsibility to act. Back at work the next day, he launched an official investigation into the zoo. He hoped to shut it down based on neglect or even cruelty. Since it was a lot for one person, he asked a coworker to help. He'd taken photos during his visit to use as evidence, and some of them, especially the one of the orangutan, ended up being shared online. The photo of the heavy orangutan quickly went viral. Alongside it was a short note that the animal couldn't seem to stand, and that its size probably wasn't due to food. That single post stirred up a lot of questions across major forums. And that's how Charles, a local vet, came across it. He couldn't believe what he saw, but he also couldn't stop thinking about what might be causing it. He found older pictures of the zoo's animals on their website, taken about a year ago. In those, the orangutan looked totally normal, which meant something had changed in just 12 months. If food wasn't the reason, what was? Charles decided to call the zoo directly, but to his surprise, a police officer answered. The zoo had already been shut down while the investigation moved forward. Officers were gathering as much proof as possible, and they had brought in professional help to care for the animals. But the process was moving slowly. The zoo's owner was frustrated by the shutdown, but the truth was clear. None of the animals were getting what they needed there, and every single one would have to be moved somewhere safer. That's when Charles saw his chance. Since he worked for himself, he offered to help out with the animals during the transition. The police were more than happy to accept. There was plenty of work to go around. They could finally put Charles's years of experience to good use. He made the trip to the zoo that very same afternoon. While he planned to help every animal he could, his thoughts kept drifting back to the orangutan. He didn't want to waste another minute. When he got there, he was greeted by the lead vet running the rescue. The man seemed upbeat until Charles brought up the orangutan. Then his face shifted. He looked unsure. They hadn't had time to check on that one yet, and honestly, it wasn't high on their list. The orangutan looked so bad they had sort of written it off. At first, Charles felt a little stuck. He'd known this might happen, but still, it stung. He'd been eager to get close to the orangutan right away, but now it seemed he'd have to wait. The head vet had other priorities. He explained that the zoo had been careless with all their animals, and several needed urgent care. Charles hadn't planned for this, but he knew what had to be done. As a vet, he had a duty to help every animal, so he nodded and stepped in to support wherever needed. Charles got assigned to run health checks on the animals scheduled to be moved out that day. It took him about 2 hours to get through the list. Once those animals were safely on their way to better homes, only a few remained. The staff and volunteers were wrapping up, and Charles was finally able to turn his focus to what had brought him here in the first place. Waving goodbye as the others left for the day, Charles smiled faintly to himself. He was ready, but there was a nervous tension he couldn't ignore. No matter how weak this orangutan seemed, it was still a wild animal. A big one. He needed to move slowly and stay calm, or risk making things worse. No one else wanted to be near it. Everyone had given up, but Charles hadn't. He knew he'd be the only one going in, and he was okay with that. It was the right thing to do. He walked in slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. But to his surprise, the orangutan didn't react at all. For a second, Charles worried the animal had already passed. Then, just as panic began to set in, he saw it take a slow breath. Relief hit him. Charles quietly knelt beside it, unsure if this stillness was from sheer exhaustion or something else entirely. The orangutan's stomach was badly bloated, and Charles could tell it wasn't just fat. The swelling looked abnormal, like something deeper was wrong. While checking its body, he noticed something odd. The enclosure was completely clean. There was no sign of waste anywhere. For an animal that had been mostly motionless for months, this didn't add up. That's when it clicked. The orangutan hadn't been able to relieve itself. It was suffering from a serious digestive blockage. There was only one way to confirm it: surgery. Charles had the tools with him, but operating alone came with big risks. Sedating an animal this size, especially one so weak, was dangerous. It could easily go wrong. He paused to think, but not for long. The orangutan's condition wasn't going to improve on its own. Waiting would only make it worse. If there was a chance to save this animal, he had to act now. He gave the sedative, watching closely as the orangutan drifted off to sleep. Once the breathing steadied, Charles got to work. He made the first cut carefully. It had been a while since vet school, but he had studied the species the night before, just in case. Slowly, he made his way through the tissue toward the source of the issue. What he found was shocking. The intestines were stretched far past normal. The orangutan's bowels were packed with trapped waste, but something was clearly blocking it. Charles gently massaged the area and made a careful incision. In an instant, a rush of waste poured out, relieving the pressure that had been building up inside the poor animal. Then Charles spotted the cause: a tangled clump of plastic food trays. It all made sense now. The orangutan had swallowed the clear trays used by zoo staff. They hadn't removed the liners properly, and it nearly cost this animal its life. With calm, steady hands, Charles removed the plastic pieces one by one, making sure not to damage the surrounding tissue. Once everything was out, he cleaned the area, stitched it up, and gave the orangutan fluids to help with the dehydration. Now all he could do was wait and hope for the best. The next morning, Charles returned to check in, unsure of what to expect. But the sight that greeted him was unbelievable. The orangutan was already perking up. The team, including the head vet, was stunned. No one expected such a fast turnaround. It felt like a small miracle. Charles let out a quiet sigh, deeply relieved. The staff thanked him for stepping in when no one else did. Charles smiled and made a decision right then. He would stay on and personally monitor the orangutan's recovery until it was strong enough to be moved to a better, safer home. Because of his quick thinking and dedication, this animal got a real second chance. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories just like this one. You never know which life might be saved next.